Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this session tonight. We really appreciate you being here. We're excited to have Greg Hipp from Chicago Area Runners Association here to present. I'll introduce Greg in a minute, but I just wanted to do some housekeeping. It seems like everybody got my email today with some instructions, but just as a reminder, please keep yourself on mute while Greg presents. And if you have any questions or anything you want to share with Greg, utilize the chat function and I can relay that to him. And also there will be a Q&A portion after Greg finishes his presentation. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, if you could put it in the chat box, I'll keep a running tab or tally of questions that have been asked. And then after Greg finishes his portion, his presentation portion, I'll kind of call on people to unmute themselves and you can ask Greg your question. So that being said, Greg Hipp, our presenter, has been the executive director of RRCE member, the Chicago Area Runners Association since 2017. Prior to that, Greg was the organization's director of events and marketing. Overall, Greg has more than 3 decades of experience in the sport, joining his first running club, an RRCA member, the Charlotte Road Runners Club at age 11. And he has worked as a timer, event director, and prior to his role with CARA, Chicago Area Runners Association, he was a collegiate track and field and cross-country coach with stops at Appalachian State University, Missouri State University, Northern Illinois University, and Northwestern. So without further ado, let me turn the keys over to Greg Hipp.
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and appreciate the opportunity from you and Gene and RCA to come together with fellow club leaders and talk about a return to group running. And thanks everybody for joining. I know it's challenging times. We're all looking to share ideas, and I've certainly relied upon a lot of fellow club leaders over the past few months, more than ever, to help operate our club and organization in a safe way. But this evening, just going to talk about returning to group running and what CARA's operational preparedness to do that was, and how we came to those plans. And we started planning back in early March. Certainly never thought that we would see Chicagoland and really the whole world and the state that it currently is. But we began to plan then for how we could return once we were allowed to do so. But if you're not familiar with CARA, we're the Chicago Area Runners Association. We're a nonprofit organization committed to serving and advocating for the local running community. And we call ourselves Chicagoland's Running Club. And our goal is to provide accessible opportunities for all runners to train, race, learn, be social, and volunteer. We have a little over 10,000 members, and which we think that means we're the 3rd largest running club in the United States. And we serve as the voice of local runners, as well as providing over 1,300 dates of programs and events per year. We're, I think, in our 41st year right now, so I haven't been around for all of them. A little overview of what we're going to talk about. So, as CARA began to put these plans together, we collaborated with RCA to develop this operational preparedness plan for group running that we could share originally back on May 18th with all of our fellow RCA clubs. And as we get started, just some key considerations for all of you is I encourage you to respect and follow the guidelines of your locality, and use this plan as really a guide for how you can best meet the requirements of your community, rather than just simply following this plan, verbatim. And the key thing, I think, is prioritize the safety and well-being of your club members, participants, volunteer staff, and we also say to families those people return to post a run. And if your locality is not providing you a lot of guidance, then certainly you should still take it upon yourself to ensure a safe environment, whether they're forcing you to or not. But the guidelines that we're working under here in Chicago and Chicagoland, and our membership is Chicago and the suburbs, so it gives us kind of a little bit of multiple guidelines to follow, but we're mainly working under what's called the Restore Illinois plan, which is a phased plan similar to some of the ones that you may have in your states. And right now we're in what's called phase 4, and that allows persons together in groups of up to 50 persons, with multiple groups of 50 allowed in outdoor venues, so long as those groups do not interact. And more than 50 people is not permitted in Illinois until phase 5, and that requires a vaccine, a treatment option that is readily available and that ensures healthcare capacity is no longer a concern, or there are no new cases of COVID over a sustained period of time. So we're really seeing ourselves not able to progress from where we currently are until probably well into the spring. So Illinois is a pretty restricted state, and I can't come up with any reasons why they shouldn't be right now. But one of the things that gives me confidence is our requirements in Illinois are pretty strict, and we're meeting them all. So that gives me some confidence that maybe we're doing a good job to make people safe if we can actually meet the requirements in Illinois. But where we're implementing our plans right now is through training programs that CARA hosts. So we have marathon and half marathon plans or programs. We meet at 11 different locations weekly in the city and the suburbs. Each of them has 12 different pace groups for weekend long runs. And our participation traditionally is a little over 2,000 runners per week. This year, our registration is down 50%, and then attendance is only about 50% of those who are actually registered. So hopefully that can give you a little bit of perspective of maybe on, what you could expect when people come back out, of how many are ready and how many are staying home. And when we developed this plan, there are a number of considerations that we went through, and the way we developed our plan first was to identify all the different areas that we needed to have a plan for or define a plan for, rather than just looking at the run holistically. We started just to break apart the different pieces of our program and how we gather. And so we came up with the things that we needed to define would be participant advisements and expectations, managing positive COVID-19 cases, our meeting locations, gathering size, how we would gather pre-run, how we would actually organize during the group runs, how we would manage our hydration stations, and what we would do post-run. So getting started, participant advisements and expectations, a lot of the things that we have been communicating routinely to our members, and this goes out at least weekly to them. These are similar things that we're all dealing with in many parts of the country to go anywhere and to do anything. So much of it's not a surprise to people when they hear it from us. But it's things like do not participate if you're feeling sick or ill, or if you have a fever, or if you've been in contact with someone unrecovered from COVID-19. Persons from high risk groups, should consult their physician before participating. Not to engage in forms of physical contact, so handshakes, high fives, hugs, partner stretching, etc. Avoid those close group pictures and selfies, and always, maintain those social distance guidelines. The thing I tell our leaders is, when it comes to those pictures, is I hope you're not going to get close together to take those pictures. But if you are, definitely don't take a picture of yourself doing something wrong. The last thing we need to have is everybody putting a social media picture up of not following the guidelines. Also things like, not spitting or snot rocketing, nose rocketing, in your groups, not to share personal items like hydration bottles, gels, towels, mask or face covers, are required anytime persons cannot maintain social distance or 6 feet, or where local guidelines require. So some localities have different rules that are even more restrictive than 6 feet. And then we're telling participants to self-carry hydration and to use our hydration stations or fountains for refill only. And I'll get into how we're operating those a little bit later. And then what we've communicated to all of our participants is that if a participant's actions do not meet expectations, or they're creating risk for themselves or others, we may require them to exit the group. And so we put that up front so they understand that. This is a sign that we have at one of our programs, just to kind of help exhibit those guidelines, but these are all the similar things that you just heard me read out. Talking mask or face covers, that's certainly, I think, one of the biggest challenges or topics that a lot of running groups are trying to figure out. And the key thing that we talk about with all of our leaders is leaders must set the example. I've told our leaders that everybody's within their right to have their own opinion on mask or face covers, except when they come to CARA training. When they come to CARA training, the only rule is the actual local guidelines we're required to follow. And so they accept that when they come. And if they can't accept the guidelines, then they can't come. But we tell our participants that everybody has to have a mask or face cover with them when they come to a run. And anytime they can't maintain 6 foot distance, they have to have it on, even while running. And we've actually had really great success. And that's been because the way we've communicated it, and we've really set the expectation. And so it's been about encouragement, education, about positive communication, not negative, not shaming, not scolding. And so managing that way, treating people like adults instead of acting like we're their parent, has allowed us to get people to follow the guidelines. So I think it's important to consider not just what you need people to do, but also how you're going to communicate it to those in your club. But one of the things that we've talked about a lot is the times where you do need to run with a mask or face cover. Slow down. We slow down when it's cold sometimes. We slow down when it's windy. We slow down when it's too hot. There's all kinds of reasons in running when you need to slow down. And we don't freak out about that. So we don't need to freak out if we have to slow down while we have to have that mask or face cover on. But you don't need to wear a medical mask. That's not what you run in. Use things like a buff or a gaiter or performance-based mask. The Zensa is a great one. The buff filter mask, which is what I run in. It's this one here. It's lightweight. It's got straps. It's performance material. I've run in it and I've loaded big trucks in it for running things and had no problem. So it's my favorite. But there's also the Adidas mask, and then I got the Under Armour mask. But I'm not a big fan because I don't like ears. I like neck straps. The great thing about the ones with neck straps, and we've done a lot of work to not just tell our members to wear masks, but also to guide them on what the right way to do it is and what the best options are. And the great thing about these is you wear it around your neck. And when you don't need it, you just leave it here. When you do need it, you just pull it up. So it's real easy. Whereas if you're doing the ones with the ears, it makes it really difficult to pull it up or down when you need to. So I think important thing is to make sure your members know the options that are out there and that there are options made for running. And so that helps a lot. But these are some pictures from some of our group runs. As you can see, runners wearing their face covers, and so just again some examples of some of the success that we've had there. But so moving kind of forward, so managing positive COVID cases. This is one of the more difficult things to figure out. And our original plans have changed over the last couple months from what we thought was the right thing for us to do to what is now what we're being told by people in our local health department. We have, like many of you, have members who work in all kinds of different fields. And fortunately, one of our members works for the health department, so she guided us on what their opinions were. But the important thing is we needed to consider first how we would manage a positive case before we resumed. We've not had any reported to us or that are known to us, and I think certainly the numbers are more in our favor than not. But we still need to think about what we would do if that time came. And it really comes down to contact tracing. And what we've been told by health department officials is the most effective and efficient way that participants can help with contact tracing if they were to test positive is to make sure they know the people they're running with and they've had close contact with. And so some of our groups are people that don't always know each other in the beginning. So one of the things that we did, and we didn't even tell our members why we did it, is the training shirts that we give them have a block on the back where you're supposed to write your name this year. So they think it's to help people learn their name for fun, but it's actually to help with contact tracing. So that they learn everyone's names much quicker. But other simple things like pre-run, people just introducing themselves just helps people know. And our health department person we talked to said it's not everybody that was at the run that necessarily is in trouble. It's anyone who basically was in close contact for a long period of time. So that may or may not actually occur. But what we've been told is to rely on the health department to make determination of who needs to be notified. But absent of that, I think a member should at least, tell anybody that they've been in close contact with. But if you, as a club leader, do become aware of a member testing positive, you need to maintain their confidentiality. It's not something that gets blasted out to the club that, Sam got COVID-19 and we all need to worry about that, unless that particular member said, please tell everyone. So make sure you're thinking carefully about confidentiality, but also having your plan for what you'll do if you had a positive case of someone who had been participating in your group runs. So into some of the little less complicated stuff, meeting locations. You want to look for places right now that have large open spaces so that your groups can spread out more than they normally do pre-run and allow for that social distance guideline of at least 6 feet. You want to avoid gathering in locations that could cause conflicts for others. So meeting directly in front of businesses where you're going to create conflict for customers or residents is something you want to think about. Avoid meeting it indoors. Certainly that's a big piece of what we're all hearing in articles in the news about indoor gatherings are the most risky. So avoid meeting indoors where there's limited ventilation or where there's lots of touch points, doors, counters, things like that. So it's probably not the time for club group runs to happen at the running store, unless the running store has a really big parking lot, so it kind of depends. But think about where you're going and where you're going to meet. And if normally your run means that customers have to get around you or you're blocking residents walking down their street, you might need to think about a new place to go. But one of the things that we've thought about and talked a lot about is even if we're doing everything right, there are people of heightened sensitivity right now. And so we also wanted to think about where we were going to meet. And again, even if we did everything right, it might be better for us to meet in a less popular location where we don't set ourselves up for, negative PR, negative perception. Because there are some people that whether you're following guidelines or not, they don't want you to be gathering. They don't want you to meet. And so, we had one of our groups that does run in a popular forest preserve, but instead of meeting at the forest preserve now, we rented a parking lot down the street so that we could, and then we run into the forest preserve. So the place that we gather is on private property now. Gathering size. Most important thing with gathering size is don't exceed your local gathering guidelines, and don't gather until your locality allows people to gather together. In Chicago, originally gathering started to be allowed with 10 people. We originally thought that this wasn't going to work, so we waited until 50 people could gather before we considered coming together, because we didn't think we could manage a 10-person limit. But whatever your local guideline is, that has to become your cap. Whenever your attendance could exceed that, if your locality allows it, you split up into multiple groups. And so, like I said earlier, Chicago and Illinois allow us to have multiple groups of 50 in the same venue as long as we stay separate from each other. So that's how a lot of our groups are gathering. They're never interacting together, but they're in the same park, just far apart from each other. But you could also just have, one pace group meet on this block, another pace group meet a couple blocks away, is a way to split up your groups. And then we'll talk about pre-run gathering, and kind of goes along with that. Like I said, use a larger area, when you're meeting for pre-run gathering, and make sure everybody has room to practice social distancing. If your groups are splitting up into multiple pace groups or different, training levels, if they're splitting up because they need to split up for size, then make sure they're not organizing side by side. Give themselves some space. They might be an eye shot of each other, but make sure that, if the public comes by, they're not going, hey, there's 100 people over there. It's 30, 100 feet away from each other. So consider some of those things. Use that full footprint of the places that you're gathering. Make sure, again, it's like a broken record, as people gather together, they need to maintain that 6-foot distance from each other. Consider using signs and things like that. If you're over a much larger footprint and people wouldn't necessarily know which group to go with, you can simply print out, like some of our groups are just using 11 by 17 paper signs laminated, and they hold them up, 10-minute pace group. And then people can see it as they walk through the parking lot and they find the correct group. So you don't have to buy something fancy to do it, but that can help people find each other if that's going to be a challenge for people to find them. But each club would have a little bit different challenge or not. As you do meet, you should avoid meeting in front of restrooms, hydration, fountains, so that you're not creating congestion around places that lots of people might need to go to. So just kind of moving away from these type of places for your gathering area is important. When you're doing your announcements, that's another piece. We used to do announcements. The full training program would come together. One person would get up on a ladder with a bullhorn and make all the announcements, and then we split up. Well, now each pace group leader has to do all the announcements in their small group, so we don't ever all come together. And then we also limit our announcements to really only what needs to be done for the run: introductions, the route, how far we're going, and reminder of our safety guidelines. And then we're using our club newsletter or social media to spread some of those kind of routine announcements about other things coming up, so we can keep people congregated as short amount of time as possible. And then if multiple groups are in the same venue but separate, what we're doing is we're sending them off one by one about a minute apart. And the reason for that is so we don't get to the first intersection or the first hydration stop, and before one group is able to get past it, another group has reached it. And then no longer are we staying separate, so you need to think about what's going to happen from the start of the run through the run to the end of the run. As soon as those groups interact, if you exceed a gathering guideline, you've at least in theory, fallen on one of the guidelines your locality might have. So here's just some examples. Our groups do not look this perfect, but it's an example of how you might pre-run gather. It's a concept of essentially if every person has an 8 foot by 8 foot square, you're actually 6 feet apart. The other good thing we've told members, and we've seen many other RCA clubs do this, is hold your hands out. If you can't touch anybody, you're probably 6 feet apart. So that's a good way to do a check. And some of our groups will do that just during the runs. They'll hit a mile marker and they'll call out to check up, and everybody will just hold their hands out for a second. And if person to your right and left both have it and you're still far apart, unless you're a really small person, you're 6 feet apart. So these are just some examples, though, to give people a concept of how we gather. But really, it's just all about stay 6 feet apart. So during the run, we would normally run with 2x2 formations. Is how we would get down some of our busier trails here in Chicago. We can't go 2x2 side by side anymore, because then we're too close together, unless everybody wants to keep their mask or face cover on. So we've got some adapted formations, and I'll show you what some of them look like in a second here. But anytime we're not 6 feet apart, anytime we're passing people close, our groups have to pull their mask up. And believe me, I get emails and calls anytime our groups don't, from people that are on the trail. CARA is the Chicago running complaint line. So I get a couple emails a week, even during normal times, of someone who said, your group passed me too close, and we just be respectful. We're working on it. We'll be better, and I don't get combative and that sort of thing, which isn't always easy, but especially when you love your group and they were doing their best to do the right thing. But you want to give people space, and when you can't, have that mask up or face cover. If you have a pace group that has multiple people that are leaders, spread them out through the group so that multiple people can be continually reminding people to keep social distance, remind people when it's time to pull the mask up, and also to do the normal group run kind of things like, some of our groups will use signals for stopping, for passing, for turning, some of those things. We have groups of 2 to 3 people, and we have groups during normal times of 55 people that are running together. So those big 55-person groups need to have signs and hand signals for everybody to know what to do. But we use a lot of those in our runs now, and especially. But we've reminded our groups, of the heightened sensitivity on the trail, give people as much room as possible, especially now, as always, but to avoid swarming, which is where if it's 2x2 group, just pass someone like this, because that makes a trail user really uncomfortable when they get passed by people on both sides of them. So you want to only pass, the whole group needs to pass on one side. We've told our groups that no matter what you do, someone is going to make a negative comment to you on the trail this year. And you need to prepare for that. And you need to not yell back something negative to them. You know, that's something that I think all of us just have to recognize. Someone's going to be mad at us, you know, because everybody is stressed out right now. So be prepared to brush it off, because the last thing we want is for somebody to yell at us, one of our runners to yell back at them. That person is now emboldened to go call their alderman, you know, or the park district, and say CARA's doing this and that, and then next thing you know, we lose our permit. So, you know, high road right now is really important. So here's just some examples. So normally we would run 2x2, pretty close together. You know, you can see all the little running figures there. What most of our groups are doing now is a staggered formation. So the X is just where we remove somebody for our normal 2x2s. And that keeps people about 6 to 8 feet apart. And then some of the groups on more congested trails are running single file with essentially 6 to 8 feet in between. And then some just use a combination depending on where they're at during the run. Nothing ever looks as perfect as a diagram, but diagrams do help people get a conceptual idea of what they need to do out on the run. This is a picture of one of our groups. They're actually 6 feet apart, but they're wearing masks anyway. That's their choice. This is just one of our local forest preserves. So hydration stations, talk a little bit about how we're managing those. We provide at all of our training programs, hydration stations, typically every 2 or 3 miles. We have 11 locations, and at the height of the summer, we give about 20,000 cups of fluid a week. And that's a big part of why people like our program. So we knew that we need to make sure we figure out a way to get people their hydration, but we needed to adapt. So we tried to, and have come up with a way to do what we call contactless hydration, which is essentially means limit the contact by others with anybody else's hydration. So, you know, I can touch my hydration, but nobody else came into contact with my hydration. You know, that's really the key thing you're trying to accomplish. But part of it is that we're telling people that they must self-carry a bottle this year. And to use our stations for refill. And the reason we've done that is to avoid the need for open cups that people might lean over, cough, sneeze over, and also so we can reduce the frequency of stations to only about every 4 to 6 miles this year. So we can reduce those stopping points, those congestion points, the number of touch points that that runners have to have. Yeah, so I think that's an important part of making sure our groups don't interact, since we're allowed to have multiple groups of 50, but they're not supposed to interact. So that's one of the ways that we work around that. I'll talk a little bit about how we set up our hydration stations and some of the things that we came up with. One, we've just expressed to all our participants that we're going to make sure we take extra hygiene standards when people are working with the hydration. Both pre-run and during a run, that those volunteers would have a mask on, gloves, they would have washed their hands or used hand sanitizer. You know, those sort of things are kind of a given, but you know, helping people be confident that you're doing the right thing, and even some of the things that might seem obvious, helps give people confidence. So we're communicating all the things that we're doing to our runners. Just like our meeting area, our hydration stations have just a larger footprint. So they're not just 1 or 2 tables. There are lots of tables spread out to keep people separated. And then we're also using something called the Ultra Spout, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, that we put on all of our coolers, and it works kind of like a soda fountain trigger. So people can press their bottle up against it without putting their hand on the cooler. And that allows for that touchless, no hand contact of the coolers. Some of our stations, especially on like the Chicago Lakefront Trail, have a volunteer or a worker that stays there the entire time, and so they'll routinely sanitize the spouts, even though there's not supposed to be hand contact. And then in the suburbs, At our far facilities, we don't have a person standing there the whole time. We bought little pocket hand wipes, and we give them out at the beginning of the run so that runners can put them in their shorts pocket or their bottle if it has a zipper pocket, and they can wipe down the coolers before they use it if they want to, or their hands. And then when people request a cup, we tell them they can't use the same cup twice. And that's so that after they filled it up, drank out of it, they don't push that cup up against the trigger that their mouth has been on. So we just make them come get another cup. We've been putting anywhere from 6 to 12 coolers in the city, typically 4 coolers in the suburbs at our locations. When the runners get to the station, the group leader is supposed to remind everybody to maintain social distance, to wait their turn, come up to the coolers one at a time, and to move through the stations quickly. Sometimes our groups would stop at a station and, have a quick chat, take a picture. We're encouraging them to keep moving, avoid some of that stopping this year. This is the Ultra Spout. It's really neat. I've got one here too. It just works like that. So they can push a bottle. This is my coffee mug, but they can push a bottle like that and not have to put their hand on it. And it works great, and they're high flow. So this will fill up a 10 or 12 ounce bottle in 2.5 seconds. So that's way faster than your typical Gatorade cooler. And there's a couple of groups out there that have taken these, one of the, it's like vacation races or something. They actually took these and designed a foot pedal that they could attach to it. And we did the same thing, but I started playing with it and thought that we'd break it in 1 week. So we decided to stick with just pushing your bottle up against the trigger. But I put a link in this presentation, but if you just search Water Monster and Ultra Spout, you'll find it. The company Ultra Spout sold the rights to this to Water Monster. So if you get to the Ultra Spout website, it'll direct you to Water Monster. They're about $25. So they're not cheap. They almost cost as much as a cooler. But they've done a lot to instill confidence in our runners. And because they're high flow and they fill up so quickly, we can keep runners moving through really fast. Whereas the typical Gatorade cooler, it might take, 3 or 4 times as much time. And we add up lots of runners. We had done the math. If we were using Gatorade coolers, it could take 12 minutes for a full group to get to a hydration station. Now it happens in, 3 or 4 minutes. This is a picture of it in action from last Saturday. And then this is a picture of our hydration stations. We're dealing with a lot of runners, so everybody's hydration station does not need to be this big. And we also serve the public. So we serve everybody on the Chicago Lakefront Trail for free every Saturday, as well as our training program. So Saturday on the Lakefront Trail, there's, there could be as many of 100,000 people use the trail on a normal Saturday. We're not there all day long, thankfully. But in the morning, we serve anybody that comes to our station. And so we have to prepare for more fluid than just our club. This is just some diagrams of how we set up the stations, in generality as well. Key thing is make sure that your tables are at least 6 feet off the path, both for social distancing, but also to make sure that when your runners stop, they're not on top of the path blocking everybody else while they're at the hydration station. And then we put a table, and as you can see here, the coolers are on the short end of the table facing out. And that means that if you're standing at one end of the table versus the other end of the table, you're 6 feet apart. There's a typical table 6 feet. And so that's how we've done it. Our runners actually really like this. In previous years, we would have someone with 2 tables, and they would just fill up cups and lay them out on the table like a typical aid station, and everybody would come and grab them. But they actually really like this. We'll probably just continue to do it. We'll go back to every 2 to 3 miles, but we'll probably do this method forever with bottles because, like I said, we were giving out 20,000 paper cups a week, and that's not a good thing for the environment. So our runners are enjoying not using paper cups for that reason. So kind of getting near the end before questions, post-run, it's real simple. Follow the same things. When your group's finishing up, maintain social distance. If you're going to do wrap-ups or stretching, just keep your distance again, avoid those physical contacts, the high fives, the hugs, the handshakes. Those are hard, especially at the end of a run where somebody maybe have just completed their longest run of their life or had a great run. You want to celebrate, you want to give them a high five, you want to congratulate them. Not this year. Try to figure out a way to do it verbally. Organize post-run activities at our training sites or group run sites where multiple groups come together. We can't have that occur because then we'd be breaking our permits. We can't control what adults decide to do when they leave the group run, but when they're at the group run, we're responsible. And then activities where we would serve food and things like that. Anything that's not prepackaged, we don't do. So a lot of our runs would have, the same things a lot of clubs have. We would have potlucks. We would have a cooler full of ice cream. We would have beer circle, all kinds of good things. We just can't do that this year in any official capacity. So that's a lot there. But when it comes down to it, like what we've told our runners it can be summed up in a couple of sentences. Bring your mask, wear it when you're not 6 feet apart. Don't forget your bottle. And I think that's it, but you need to have a plan for how you're going to do it. So, and then you need to instill confidence that you know how you're going to do it. And I think the other thing that I want to say is I've seen a lot of clubs that have even posted parts of this plan. And then I've seen all their Facebook pictures of the run and they didn't do any of it. So they told their members they were going to do this to keep them safe. And when they got there, they didn't enforce it. So it's, I think the thing that I want to tell you is provide what you promised. If you promised to keep people safe, keep them safe. If you promised you would provide a certain environment, provide that environment. Some people came because you said you would do that. And I think that's the important piece. Our attendance is lower. Some of it's because of just the way of the world right now. Some of it is because we're holding people to these standards. And we decided really early on that our responsibility was more important than our training program registrations. And that's not been easy in an organization that has staff. Because it's certainly financially challenging. When you don't have as many people register for things, but I think we decided to do that, and I think we've built a lot of capital in our community, running community and otherwise, because we've taken the stance of promoting running safety guidelines. Our relationships with the city, our relationships with aldermen are better than ever because we decided to figure out how to work with them instead of sneak around them, and that'll pay off in the long run. But questions?
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. This was super helpful. So the first question, Michelle During had a question about hydration. Michelle, if you want to unmute yourself and pose it, that would be great.
Thanks. Thank you, Greg. I had a question. If you have a preferred water bottle to run with or hydration vest?
Yeah, I personally run with like a Nathan speed bottle. It's like a handheld. A lot of our runners wear a belt, and then a number are wearing the big vests, which I'm not a big fan of vests myself. I just get hot, and I don't think I actually need to carry that much water when there's a hydration station, available to me every 4 to 6 miles. That's a lot of water in a vest. So really something with 10 to 12 ounces is I think all people really need if you can provide hydration within every 60 minutes. If you're not, and that's fine. So if you're not going to have hydration stations, and there's nothing wrong with that, you just need to communicate that to your runners so they can prepare to have enough hydration for the run. But if, let's say, you're going to do a 20-mile run, you probably can't carry enough fluid for that. So the club really needs to think about, can we reasonably say no hydration provided if you're going to run that far? But generally 10 to 12 ounces is enough. And then on that same note, as you're thinking about how much like water or Gatorade or sports drink to put out there, you might have data on how much you normally use, And now you got to think about people are not filling up small cups now; they're filling up full bottles. So you have to think about how that might affect how much it's going to deplete your coolers. Now that people are pulling more water from a single location.
Thank you.
Next question was from Keith about volunteers. Keith, if you want to unmute yourself and ask Greg, fire away.
Okay, will do. Hi, Greg. Hey, that was a good presentation. So my question was just on the volunteers you have for your hydration, right? Seems like because it's a lot of work, even without all these extra precautions. So my question was, how do you kind of incentivize your volunteers, or how do you get volunteers for your weekly runs? And do they like stay there the whole time and refill? Or do they just set them out and go like part of coaching or something like that?
Yeah. So we at our city locations, we have somebody stay with the hydration the whole time, and the reason is it gets stolen if we don't. Chicago's not as bad as it looks on the news, but if you leave a cooler and a table in the city of Chicago, it's still going to walk away, no matter what part of Chicago you put it in, because it's happened to us. So we monitor it. We also, there's just so many runners coming through our city stations that there's just a demand that we need to have somebody there. Our suburban locations, we drop the coolers, like a group leader will drop the coolers pre-run, and then they just sit there the whole time. Some of our suburban locations will, they put duct tape around the seal of the cooler because they just worry somebody's going to do something to their water. And they know if the duct tape isn't broken, nobody's touched it. In terms of volunteer recruiting, it's a challenge. We're not a normal club, so we have staff as well. So like we have staff that's managing a lot of the stations in the city. And then we have members volunteering. So we have Saturday and Sunday groups. So sometimes our Sunday runners will volunteer on Saturday, and sometimes our Saturday runners will volunteer on Sunday. Or we've got people that are injured and they want to do something. They want to be part of the group. They love being a hydration worker because they still get to see their group. Or sometimes it's an older member who, marathon training is not for them anymore. So this is a way for them to stay connected instead of being a group leader now. And so, that's a little bit where it comes from. But I think the abnormal part is we do have staff, we do sometimes use some hourly workers, but we've got a number of people that are volunteering. Our board, will come out and help as well. Not all of them are training anymore or training this year, so they'll come out. So it's the same source as you guys have, which means that it's hard to get volunteers for all of us. And I think that was part of our thinking too this year. We had an original plan that if anybody saw the first version of this we put out, we had a plan where we were going to have prep tables and then move cups one at a time to the end of other tables. And we had figured that we need as many as 4 to 6 people at a station. And then we started to look at it and go, we're not going to be able to get that many volunteers during COVID-19. So then we found these and we're like, okay, these allow us to do self-service, but quick enough. Whereas traditional Gatorade coolers were not allowing us to do self-service quick enough with the size of our groups. So this was a high flow, allows us to do it quick enough. So we decided to invest in these, and that's worked. And that essentially means we only have to have one person at a station. We have a van and we drop everything off one station at a time in the city, and then one person stays there. And so part of our plan was around contactless and on safety, but it was also about how can we create a plan that relies on as few people as possible in a time where not everybody feels comfortable being out and volunteering. So good question. If anybody comes up with great volunteer incentives that don't cost too much money, let me know.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I was contacting you from the San Antonio Roadrunners. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Keith. Next up, we have Lisa. Lisa, if you wanted to unmute yourself and ask Greg your question, you are up.
Hi, Greg. Thanks for your talk. So I'm curious as to how you check your runners in and what you do if someone shows up unexpectedly.
Yeah, good question. We don't do a check-in in terms of a formal check-in. Our group leaders, when they start the run, they get everybody's name, they know how many people they have, and we have people that are specifically as group leaders, and they're essentially tasked with making sure everybody gets back, keeping an eye on people in their pace groups. So that's essentially our monitoring system. What was the second part of that question?
I recognize you guys do training programs, but what happens if somebody shows up unexpectedly?
Oh, yeah. So normally we've traditionally allowed guests. We have lots of people travel to Chicago. They'll reach out and say, "Hey, can I join your group?" Sure, no problem. Or we want to encourage our runners to invite a runner to try it out, so that hopefully they'll join us. This year we told people no guests. And the reason for that is we have very explicit participant expectations. We want to stay within gathering guidelines, and so we've been more strict on it. That doesn't mean we haven't made some exceptions. We give some leeway to each training site's leader. We call them a site coordinator. We give them some leeway to still make some decisions on their own. But we've essentially said no guests. But traditionally, before this, all of our site coordinators just had a clipboard with a waiver and a bunch of lines below it. And if somebody that wasn't signed up showed up, they just signed the waiver, and then we let them run. And the site coordinator just held on to the waiver if we ever got in trouble, which has never happened. But that's how we managed that in the past. But this year we're trying to say no guests as much as possible, just because of all the things that we want people to see everything that's expected of them before they get there.
Thanks. Yeah, we're suggesting no guests as well, but I just wanted to see what everybody else is doing.
So Megan, Greg may have answered your question in responding to Lisa, but if you wanted to verify that, or
yeah, I think he
yours?
did.
Yeah.
It was kind of, he's mentioned the waiver, that they were signing the waiver there. We had an online version of it, but it doesn't always work at the site. Sometimes the connectivity doesn't work. So then I guess we're going to go back to signing a paper.
Yeah. I like
sanitizer
too, but as much as I sometimes like to do things the fancy way, I realize that sometimes paper and a clipboard actually is sufficient. Because we don't do anything with the waiver unless something actually went wrong. It just sits in somebody's car until then. So maybe that's not the best legal thing, but we don't worry about it unless we need it.
Well, do they sign a waiver every time, or do they just sign a waiver that for the whole season? Yeah,
once people signed it once, they're good.
Okay, so we could just have them sign for the whole season. We were having them do it every time, so we had a thing of who was there every time.
Yeah,
on the date.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily a bad idea. I think it all goes into your not just a liability thing, but what's your contact tracing plan. And it may be that people sign up so you know who was there. I know one local club here's their contact tracing plan is to take a group picture pre-run. The only challenge with that is it's really hard to take a group picture and not get next to each other. So if it can be done with social distancing, it's an easy plan, and then you just go back, and people generally know who's in the group, and that group doesn't allow outsiders that didn't sign the waiver or isn't a member to come, so they at least know who everybody is. But I think a sign in is still a good idea if that's your way of being able to identify who was there. If you've got to come back and say, Sam got COVID, he needs to tell Jane.
And I think the last question we have here is Peter. So Peter, floor is yours.
Sounds good. Hey, Greg, great conversation, man. Thanks for being here. Quick question for you. a little different. This is, it's probably more about races, but honestly, similar to what you guys are doing. Talk to me about the start of your run. So I know you guys are in groups. When you start the run, is everyone starting together? And the reason I ask this is as we start our races back up, we're debating between the only successful race I've seen here so far. It was a time trial start. So every 5 or 10 seconds, they started someone. So the question is, do we have to follow that? Or do we, and our race directors are asking too, do we go to small wave/group starts as long as people are, social distance at the start with 6 feet apart? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so we have a program that we do here in Chicago. We call it Go Run, short for Chicago Run, where we do a free timed 5K mile 40 weekends of the year. And so we resumed it last week. We started it with only 50 people, which is not a lot of people, but we let 50 people in, but later we might expand it with some waves. And what we did there, it's basically like UK Park Run. If anybody's familiar with the park runs in the UK, and these are all in like underserved neighborhoods, so it's kind of a community outreach thing more than anything. But we just lined people up by pace, and you stayed 6 feet apart. And because it's not a hyper competitive environment, people were okay with being kind of strung out, and it worked pretty well. At the start line, everybody had to have their mask on, but as soon as they had space, they were allowed to take it off. And that's what we did for that. And then in 2 weeks, we're having an actual paid event, but it's track meet. But it's operating like some of the other ones I've seen, where we're doing a pod system. And when you register, you select a group. So you're in group A, B, C, D, or E, with a different start time, a different arrival time. And then we have 3 large quadrants, or roped off pods within the facility that and you get assigned to a pod, and you can go into the pod an hour before, and you can warm up there, or you have to leave the facility to warm up. But you can either warm up there, you can check it. Every pod has its own check-in table, it has its own gear check, it has its own toilets. They're all identical, and they're all independent. And then when your race time comes, we bring you out to the track, you race, then you go back in the pod, and you've got 45 minutes to drink a beer and to socially distance socialize. And then you have a time where you have to leave, and then they leave, and then the next group enters the pod. So we can have as many as 3 pods active on the venue at a time, with the size of the venue that we're going to be at. And then you just keep adding more pods as you have registrants. It's not to a profitable scale, but it allows things to happen. Having thousands of people with 50-person pods is not going to work. But having several hundred, can work. So we're doing that on August 9th. It helps that it's a track meet. We're just running the mile, all day. So that allows for something to happen. You could certainly do it with a 5K with the right course set up, but it's really about interaction. And there's a group in Colorado, Colfax Marathon, that's come up with a plan for road racing on pod system. It might be out there on the internet somewhere, and they're going to do. They've come up with a plan to share that their city actually asked them to make for local races, and their race is really, really big. So they know it's not going to work for them. But what they decided was, if the small races don't start off safe and right, then they're never going to let us get back to big races. So this large marathon professional company decided, we're going to make a plan for all these small races that are run by volunteers and don't have the time or the resources, and we're going to make this plan for them so they can be successful, so that later we'll get to be successful again. But so I think the pod system is a way to potentially do it, and you can get more pods through if you provide less time for pre-race stuff, or less time for post-race beer drinking, that sort of thing. But it depends on how much space you have, and then your ability to have the equipment to make pods. We're just using those little plastic foot push posts you buy at Home Depot, and flagging, so you don't have to get like expensive metal fencing and stuff like that to make it happen. But I think the pods are a way to do it. But without that, in a small event that doesn't need pods, it's really just line people up by pace, wear a mask until everybody's separated.
Awesome. And I think we actually did one last question here as we hit the hour mark. And Corey had a question that he wanted to ask about sign-ins.
Oh, thank you, Andy. I guess my question is more along the lines for insurance purposes. Like, say, I kind of like the idea of a sign-in sheet because you can keep track of how many people show up to your group event, and you could, say somebody shows up late and it's like you still have time to sign in before your event starts. But what do you do if somebody I guess this kind of goes back to what do you do if somebody shows up unexpectedly and you're not there for that person to sign in? Can they still participate, or can they participate without signing in?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that's your own club's policy, really, and I think it depends upon what other types of waivers you might have. Like our membership system, the first time somebody logs in, they have to sign a waiver, or they can't log into their own our membership system. So we always have that, no matter what. Is kind of a fail safe. But if you're relying on that sign up pre-run, then then if you I guess I'd say this, if you require and want people to sign in, then don't make too many exceptions that let them not sign in. Because if you make exceptions, people just stop caring about the policy. So I think you do have to kind of set your expectation, whatever you want it, whatever you feel like it needs to be. We've decided we're comfortable with the single waiver sign when you join the program or join the club. And people have to essentially do that annually. But I think that's an insurance, a liability question, and so it sort of depends on our provider, which I guess is all the same.
Yeah, I was going to say, Corey, I feel like that might be a question for us at the national office. And, you have my email address from when I sent the information about the meeting tonight, and we can follow up there, and that could be a more specific conversation that we have.
I think what I was trying to get down to was, I was trying with a sign-in sheet was, you keep track of how many people you have so that you are staying within the group guidelines of how many people you have to a group.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of our no guest policy, is so we don't accidentally end up with more people than we were expecting. But I think if let's say you're allowed to have 25 people where you're at, and 28 people showed up, then the group should just be like, hey, let's split into 2 groups of 14, and so I think you've got to be prepared to do that. If there's the possibility that too many people could show up, it's somehow being prepared for what you're going to do, and that we're going to have to split up to make that happen. But I think one of my concerns with sign-ins for the whole group to come to the same place is do more people than allowed to have to all come to the same place. So if you what you could do is have a sign-in with each small group if you're splitting into small groups. But not every club's going to need to split up into multiple groups to operate within the guidelines. So it really just depends if splitting up is something you have to do, either for requirement or just because your club's decided that small groups is safer and better. But if you do split up into groups, then it's probably good to make sure each group can operate independently, and they don't all have to come to any single point, like a sign-in or a single hydration stop at the beginning of the run.
Awesome. Well,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Corey. I think that's it from the group. So I'll offer a round of applause on behalf of everyone. And Greg, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This has been super informative. We have recorded the presentation, so we'll make that available to everyone very soon. And we appreciate everyone joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I appreciate you joining. And if you ever have questions, reach out. My email is real simple, just greg@cararuns.org. And happy to always talk with other club leaders.
Great.
Thank
Have a good
you.
day, everyone. Yeah, stay healthy.
Okay.